Hello everyone, and welcome to this Learn to Code tutorial series. So before we get started, I wanted to sort of explain what this series is going to be about and why I wanted to make it. So my goal with this series is to teach the basics of programming. So we're going to go over things like variables, functions, pointers, classes and objects, control flow like if statements and for loops and while loops, and maybe some design patterns, and I kind of want to do some sort of small project at the end to illustrate everything that we've learned. I'm not sure what that will be yet, but we'll think of something. And so the reason I want to do this series is just because I really like programming, and I don't know a lot of other people that share that interest, and I kind of want to share what I like to do. So maybe someone out there will appreciate something that I'm able to teach. So in this video, I'm going to go over how to set up a development environment, which is basically the place that you type your code into. And then I also want to show how to run the code. Then we'll get right into learning how to code with, I think we'll start with learning about variables. So I've considered a couple different languages for this tutorial series, and I think I've settled on C++. And the reason I think that's the one I want to do is that was the language I learned to code in, and I think it's an awesome first language. There's a lot of, more modern scripting languages like Python and JavaScript, and those are really great, but I think a language like C++ will really help you to understand the basics of coding and sort of what goes on behind the scenes in those other languages. Anyway, so let's get right back into setting up the development environment. So I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to be using Xcode to do this. If you're on Windows, I would suggest using Visual Studio. That's a really good editor for C++. But since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to be using Xcode. If you need help learning how to create a new project in Visual Studio, I can put a link for learning how to do that in the description. But anyway, I'm going to just go ahead and create a new project in Xcode here. So I'll click create a new project. It's going to be a command line tool, and I'll give it a name. I'll just call it Learn to Code. Language is C++, and I'm just going to leave everything else the same. I think this is a good folder to make it in. Here we go. And so right here, this is our C++ file. And so this very first, the default code right here is what we call a hello world program. And typically when you're learning a new language or framework or whatever, there's usually an example that just prints out hello world to the screen, and it's kind of a standard coding practice. It's kind of silly, but it's fun. So this is the hello world program for C++. And so if we click play, all it's going to do is just print out the words hello world. And so we'll see that if I click play. So it should show up here in a second. There it is. So I just printed hello world out to the screen. But I am going to actually remove this. And so for the rest of this tutorial, whatever we put inside this block right here is what's going to get run. And so I guess we'll just get right into learning about variables. So I'm going to we'll just get started. So there are a few different, so a variable in code is basically just a name that you assign to a piece of data. So the first thing you need to know about a variable is that it can have different types. There are a few different types in C++, but I think we're going to focus on 4 of the main ones today. The first of those main ones is called an integer. And an integer, is just, it's a number, a whole number, and it can be negative or positive or 0, but it's a whole number. And so the way you create an integer variable is you first tell it what type you want it to be. So an integer is called, you declare that with int, and then we give it a name. So I'm just going to call mine num apples, and then you give it a value, so I'll assign it 5. And in C++, in C++ you have to put a semicolon at the end of statements, and so you just end that with a semicolon. And so we can print this value out to the screen, kind of like we did with hello world. So this is how you print something out. You do std : cout, and then you do 2 less than signs. And so, and after the 2 less than signs, you put whatever you want to print. And so I'm going to print just our value to the screen. And then I'm going to actually print one more thing, a new line, so that it prints a new line after the 5. This is called the new line character, /n, and that just makes it so that instead of, well, you'll see. So I'm going to run this, and so it prints 5. If I were to not include the new line, then it wouldn't have, it's going to print this program ended with exit code 0 on the same line as the 5. It's kind of hard to read that way, so that's why we keep the new line in there. And so that's something else to know, is that if you want to print multiple things, you can just separate them with 2 less than signs. So I actually want to make this a little bit better, and I'm going to print the words number of apples, and then a space, and then we'll print the number of apples that we have, and then a new line. So down here you can see it says number of apples 5. So and so integer types, that's the first type. And then the second type I wanted to talk about it's called double. And basically double represents a decimal number. So I'm going to do price equals 3.25. So that would represent like the price per apple. And so I'm going to print out right here, they cost, and I'll put a $sign each, and then a new line at the end of that. So now we printed out the price, and so now it says they cost $3.25 each. And so one other thing, so you'll see what happens if I try to assign a decimal number to an int. If I try to do that, it's not gonna be happy with me. It'll probably throw an error. If I try to print out that new variable, so it didn't actually throw an error. Interesting. So it doesn't actually throw an error. It just rounds it off. So you lose that 0.23, and it just becomes 4. So if you want to keep the decimal part, use the double type. Anyway, so one other thing that's important that you can do with number types is you can do arithmetic on them. So like adding, subtracting, multiply, divide. So I'm going to declare another double, and it's going to be total cost, and then I'm going to do number of apples times price. So that the asterisk is how you do multiply in C++. And so then I'm going to print out the total cost. Okay. So if we run that, it will say number of apples 5, they cost $3.25 each. The total cost is $16.25. So that's, I guess I can show you the other arithmetic. So if you wanted to do addition, that's just a plus sign. If you want to do subtraction, a minus sign, and divide, you do a /. So if I wanted to get the number of apples from the total cost, I could do number of apples equals total cost divided by price. And so then, well, I've already used that name. You can't use the same name twice, so I'm just gonna put a 2 at the end, and I'll put this there. So now we're gonna print out the second version of that variable, and you'll see it's still 5. But anyway, so let's get rid of that. We'll use our old regular num apples. Another thing I wanted to show you was character types. So a character you declare with char, and so maybe I want my char to be the $. So I could do $= equals $. I'm actually going to move this. I'm going to move it up here. Because if we tried to print something out before we've actually declared what it is, then it's gonna get mad at us that we haven't declared it yet. So I'm gonna get rid of this $, and I'm gonna put $, just like that, and I'm going to get rid of this and do the same thing right here, $. And so if we do this, then we still have our $signs there because they're getting printed out by this right here. So that's the char, and basically a char is just a single character. It can be any character you want, but it can only be a single character. Now I know that's kind of confusing because it looks like there's 2 characters. It looks like there's a / and an n. But these are special characters, and we can talk about this more in a different episode maybe, but the / is, it's kind of special. So this all counts as one character when you use the /n. Anyway, so the last type I wanted to talk about was string. And so string is not what you call a primitive type. These are called primitive types because you can just declare them just like this with the word int, double, char. String is kind of special. It lives in a library called std, and so you have to do std : string, and that's how you access things in the library. So string, and then I'm going to say total cost string. I'm going to set it equal to the total cost is, just like that. And then I'm going to replace this with total cost string. So now, if we run this again, we should see it still prints out the same thing. But that's because these words live in this total cost string variable. So now we just print out this variable, and then we print out the $, and then we print out the total cost. So those are the four main types that I wanted to go over in this. One other thing that's important to know about variables is that they are variable, and that means that you can reassign their value. So I've already declared number of apples equals 5 up here, but maybe I want to change, maybe later on in my program I want to change how many there are. So I just say num apples equals 9. Maybe I have 9 apples now. And the reason I'm not putting an int before this is because you only need the int one time when you first declare the variable. You have to tell it what type it is. But once you tell it the type, then the code already knows the type, and you don't need to remind it what the type is. It can just look back up here to remember, oh, this is an integer type. So since we've already declared it, we leave off the int, and we just say number of apples equals 9. And so maybe now that we have a new number of apples, we want to update our total cost. So we'll do total cost equals number of apples times price. We'll just do that again. And then we'll print this out again so that we can see that the values have actually changed. So we'll say now I have num apples apples, and then we'll say now it costs $, total cost, and then we'll print the new line character. So if we run this, we should still have all the other things printing out. But now we've changed it. So now I have 9 apples, and now it costs $29.25. So yeah, so that's a pretty basic intro to variables. And believe it or not, this is actually you can do a lot. All of code is based on variables and changing those values and storing values. And so this is actually a very fundamental concept, and it's important to know. And so yeah, I would encourage you to just kind of play around with this on your own and create your own variables and do your own arithmetic on them and print out whatever you want. It's always, in my opinion, the best way to learn something is to just kind of mess around with it. So now you know basic types, and you know how to print things out. So yeah, just go ahead and have fun, and I will see you guys in the next video.